Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. But that really applause should go to the staff. Nancy, thank you for your kind introduction and all that you do for the International Medical Corps and for the world. I don't often talk about the earliest days of International Medical Corps. Even my own family doesn't really know all of the details because I've never discussed them. Many of the staff, my family and friends have asked, how did International Medical Corps begin? So I wanted to share our story with you tonight to answer that question and to honor the 35th anniversary. In the early 1980s, I was working as an emergency physician right down to the road at UCLA, living in beautiful Malibu, right in the mountains of Malibu. Across the globe in Afghanistan, the Soviet Union had invaded with the largest invasion force, many of you remember, across the border ever mounted. 50,000 troops were sent across the border and was waging a horrifying war against innocent civilians. Thousands were dying and millions were fleeing, but very few in the U.S. really knew or seemed to care. By 1983, I received a report from the Association of Afghan Doctors. That report detailed the brutality of this conflict. Of the 1,400 Afghan doctors in Afghanistan, before the Soviet invasion, only 200 remained, and they were in only the major cities. Every hospital and clinic outside of Kabul and a couple of other major cities had been destroyed. Children were being targeted by bombs that were made to look like toys. This child's hand was blown up by what he thought was a toy truck, so they would pick them up. And there was no one there to help them. I felt the need to do something. I contacted a number of relief organizations working in the refugee camps in Pakistan's border, but all of them refused to go inside Afghanistan because it was considered to be too dangerous. The Soviet Union was there, the famous Red Army. So I decided to go anyway, alone, and became the first American doctor to work inside Afghanistan, Soviet-occupied Afghanistan. The suffering I saw there was shocking, and some of these images may be a little bit hard to look at. So I just wanted to warn you, but I wanted to show you what we saw not only in Afghanistan, every single country that IMC is in right now, it's the same sort of thing. These children are lined up. If you look at their mouth and their nose, you'll see crusting. They're all dead. So these children were killed with poison gas. You'll see here in this photo, the two children reaching out towards their mother. These kids and their mother are in rigor mortis. What happened, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that with your daughter, Sienna. Anyways, but this is what goes on. Let's move that picture along. And the only reason we went to the village is Mi-24 Hind helicopter was bombing the village, and we wanted to see if there were any survivors that we could treat. And that's what we saw, and that's what everybody in this room that has been overseas, that's the kind of atrocities we see every single day. Children starving to death. So anyways, I set up a secret clinic, emergency clinic, and began to work. But we quickly ran out of supplies, so I came back to the U.S. to find support. I asked 52 health organizations for help. All 52 turned us down. I didn't know anything about starting an organization, nor did I want to. I testified before Congress, but advocacy most fell on deaf ears. I had a choice: despair in the face of overwhelming apathy toward the plight of the Afghan civilians, or take an action in spite of it. So I was fortunate enough to be able to take an action. I decided to sell the house in Malibu, not the greatest financial decision ever made, but in reality, my kids today all say that I'm the only one that has ever lost money in California real estate. Yeah. But in reality, that house, if you think about it, was owned by a bank, and I was kind of leasing it from the bank. So, not a big decision to sell the damn house. Anyways, And I moved into student housing. In fact, that's where I met Henry Hood, is in student housing. I picked a student housing that was very cheap. It had no windows, and invested the proceeds in the organization. I quickly learned that you cannot get donations without a nonprofit status. I had no idea. So I applied for that status and decided to call our organization the World Medical Corps. Seemed logical, not knowing that you had to register a name. Well, one of the volunteers, when I spoke, knew that you had to register a name, and she said, well, what's your 501c3 and registration? I said, I have no idea. I didn't even know what a 501c3 was. So she investigated and said, the World Medical Corps, that name is taken. You have to pick International Medical Corps. And then she asked, what are we going to do for a logo? So I asked the artist who drew the figures in my medical books to draw a logo. And that's how we came up with this logo that looks like a spider. So I apologize to Nancy and everybody for the logo, but that's how it came. And so in those early years, it was only the courage and empathy and generosity of our volunteers that kept us running. Around 100 volunteer doctors, nurses, and physicians assistants joined me over multiple trips into Afghanistan, while 7 more volunteers wrote letters, advocated for action, raised donations. We had hundreds of volunteers. The volunteers and I poured everything we had into it. And within 2 years, we were treating 54,000 Afghan patients a month in 24 hospitals and clinics. We moved around to keep the Soviets guessing. We operated in caves and mountainsides, underground, anywhere we could. There were aerial attacks, landmines, and gunfire. Often we operated without scrubs, gloves, or anesthesia. We ran out, always innovating to keep going with very limited resources. We finally received a grant that Reagan organized for $670,000, and then President Reagan agreed to channel funds for our clinics through Congressman Charlie Wilson. And we had enough money to hire our first CEO, the tenacious and courageous Nancy Ossie. And a couple of comments I want to make. I want to direct these comments to Nancy's mother, an 85-year-old woman who raised Nancy. Now, Nancy's dad was a milkman in Iowa, in those days that they had milkmen. Nancy wasn't the most qualified person when I met her, but here's what she had, and it just shows you can't go by a resume. You got to go by something else. When I first met Nancy, Eileen, your daughter, she was extremely young and no experience in the field. But what she had, and she had never traveled abroad, but what she had is not just a huge heart. That's easy to find. She had a brilliant mind and an incredible spirit. She's the kind of person that wanted to do this work passionately. She was so passionate, it was unbelievable. And what I realized is something I learned a long time ago. You could teach anyone the skills that they need as long as they have the heart and they have the desire and they have the desire to put in the hours to do it. And that's what Nancy did. And Eileen, that's the daughter you raised. So when you see that we have now from a few hundred to 7,000 people, that is your daughter. And that's something you could be deeply proud of. She was being called to serve the greater good in a very, very big way. And every day since, she has proved me right, not really me right, the board right, because there were several of us that interviewed Nancy. Nancy scaled the organization and brought in all of the staff that you see, the directors, and then they brought in their staff, are all brought in by Nancy. So even though I get credit for planting the seed, the real heroes are not me. I mean, anybody can plant a seed, but to make it into a redwood requires the staff and requires people like Nancy. Yeah. Throughout those early years in Afghanistan, we trained constantly. We trained more than 200 Afghan medics to diagnose and treat emergency conditions, common ailments, and then sent them back to their own communities to serve their own people. We developed an extensive emergency field training manual, and I'll tell you about that manual. There's 156, 54 lung diseases. All the doctors here know that that's the numbers. Out of those, 12 account, actually no, I'm sorry, 8. 8 account for 92% of every lung problem you'll ever see. There's 22 eye diseases that account for over 90% of all the eye conditions that you'll see. So what we did is we trained them, how do you diagnose and treat just those conditions, knowing they could treat 90% of the people. That's how we did it. And we made training the central focus of our entire mission as an organization, because we knew that a group of volunteers from thousands of miles away, however hard they worked, however passionate, would never be sustainable unless we're investing in local health workers. Thinking back to the first trip I made to Afghanistan and looking around the room tonight at all of you, I'm absolutely astounded by the power of community and by the staff who we have. From one, we became a small group, then a growing global team, and now a vast network of passionate humanitarians in thousands of communities around the world. And in a way, we're all one family. We're connected by our common humanity, committed to our shared values, and always stronger together. These are just training slides of the people we trained on goats. We always taught them on goats. We have changed millions of lives, families, and communities for better, reaching generations for the future. I want to acknowledge our global staff of more than 7,000 people who work every day in extremely challenging conditions often far too similar to those I faced in Afghanistan, risking their lives and sacrificing so much to serve. There are so many special people who have helped build International Medical Corps over the years. I would love to thank each of you individually, but it would take too long. Committed members of our extraordinary leadership team and all of the staff who work so hard, often long hours through the nights and weekends. But we would be here all night if I tried. So I'd like to ask all of the staff and volunteers of the International Medical Corps, can you please stand up, because I want to say something about you. Can you please stand up? You know, stay standing. Can you please stay standing? Just give me 2 minutes. From the bottom of my heart and from all of the board and the leadership council, I want to tell you, you, not me, you are why we are what we are today. In every single way. You guys work tirelessly. If a weekend a hurricane happens or there's a war, you guys come in on the weekend. You spend as much time as necessary. There's no Sundays or Saturdays. We are what we are because of you. And you know, you wonder who's more important. You know, if you have a car, is the transmission more important than the engine? How about that tire and the wheel? Can you run the car without it? No. Every one of you have an incredible role. And what organization that works in these kind of areas can say that we have 90 audits a year from all these donors, and you know we've never had one finding? Isn't that incredible? We've never lost so far, thank God, we've never lost a single expatriate because of the security and the logistics and the people and operations that you manage. It's absolutely incredible what you do, and I want to thank you for making us what we are today. Thank you very much. And finally, I want to acknowledge our generous supporters. You guys will have a part to play. However, and whatever you contribute, you are making a choice to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. Thank you for keeping us going for the past 35 years and for staying with us as we face the future, and more commitment and conviction than ever. Thank you very much, everybody.